Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm quite excited because this is actually the first official interview I've done since rebranding the YouTube channel. It was the Harmony Center, and I've been inspired to now kick off this new YouTube series and podcast called Conscious Conversations. So this is actually the first interview that I've done since the rebranding. So I'm quite excited, and awesome to have my friend and colleague, Miss Patty McBain, here to kick off the series. Hey, Patty.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you. I know you've got a lot to share about the topic today. So we are going to be speaking all about meditation, the benefits of and the challenges with meditation. And Patty's kind of a guru, I would say, within the meditation scene and yoga scene, and has been doing it for a long time and has a lot of wisdom and insight to share about this topic. So really excited to dive in, Patty, and find out about meditation because we hear a lot about it these days. So well, firstly, how long have you been teaching meditation?
Let's see. I started teaching in 1983. So
Teaching
that would be about 40 plus years.
Well, hence the reason you're on the show to talk about meditation. I didn't know it was that long. I thought maybe 20 years, but that's a fair time to be teaching it.
Yeah, I was 21 when I finished my teacher training course.
And when did you start meditating, Patty? So that's the teaching component of it. How long were you meditating before then if you started teaching in your early 20s?
Yeah, I started meditating in 1974. I was 13.
That's young. So I'm so curious about that. How does one in the early 70s, when you're 13, how does one start meditating? How does that even present in someone's life? How did it present for you?
Well, it was actually pretty simple. It wasn't nothing descended down from the heavens. Really, my mum was getting a divorce.
Yeah.
And she thought it would be helpful for her. It was a stressful time for her. And, I was curious. And so we did a course together. I went with my mum. And there was already people in the family, friends of the family was meditation teacher. So it wasn't something that was really foreign.
Uh-huh.
And I guess on some level it resonated, but it wasn't, it wasn't like a big thing. It was like, okay, let's do that.
So it was so your mum felt that meditation might help with the stress of the divorce, and there was someone in the family that was already doing that, so you just tagged along there, hey? With mum.
Yeah. We went together, we did the course together, and
yeah.
So
was that when you say you did a course, Patty, was it a local person? Do you remember teaching that, or was it someone from in?
It was a local woman that was teaching, and we went to a introductory talk, and then another kind of talk about it, and then we got instructed, and then we had follow-up classes, and we went along, and we were with a group of people that we all learned that weekend. And I do remember the day I learned. My teacher took me through the process of learning. It was a specific, technique and a method and all that. And she left the room and then left me to meditate on my own for a little while after instructing me, and came back into the room. And I had moved to the floor into a cross-legged position.
From where? How did she set you up?
Well, we were just sitting in a chair, but then I just moved to the floor and started to meditate. That was funny.
That's interesting. Perhaps you've engaged in it in other times.
Maybe. But certainly it was fresh for me, here, now. And then
Did you stick with it from then? Were there any gaps in it, in your
I
practices
did
then?
pretty much. Yeah, I was 13 and I used to meditate 13 minutes in the morning and 13 minutes in the evening.
Yep.
And yeah, I did it very consistently. I practiced it, and then I practiced it, more than my mum did after a while. But she was pretty regular too. But it was, I don't know what kind of made me keep it up going regularly, but I did. And then each year I would increase by a minute. That was kind of the instruction. So when I turned 14, I would meditate for 14 minutes. And then when I was 15, 15 minutes. I did have a bit of a break. Well, not so much a break. I had a period of probably a year or two, maybe a year and a half, to where I was experimenting with other substances.
Yeah.
And
Tell us about that.
well, I was just in a crowd of people. I had influences around me, and I kind of did a few drugs there. And it was interesting. I remember when I really needed or felt like I wanted to straighten up. This was at school and places like that. I would sit and meditate,
Huh.
and it would just clear me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was like a default setting when you felt you wanted to straighten up, is head for the meditation.
Yeah, yeah. So I did a little bit of that, and then came back to meditating.
Yeah, I'm interested with that because 13's so young to be meditating. I mean, in the West, it might be seen as young, really, but in Eastern traditions, it's really part of day-to-day living over there. So you're more likely to see kids and children practicing meditation in the East rather than the West. So I'm just curious there, Patty, because you were talking about a little bit of experimentation with drugs, and being that you were so young when you started, how did other kids react to that? Did they even know? Did they? Because it is kind of a different choice to make at 13.
Yeah, yeah. I think I became a bit known for it, at school with my friends. It was very. I don't ever remember feeling any like projection from anyone. I do remember soon after I did learn and I was practicing, I was invited to a birthday party, as you are. And it was a sleepover birthday party. I was in an all-girls school. And my mum came in with me when she dropped me off, and she spoke to the parents, and she said, Patty's meditating. And, she'll just slip away, in the morning, in the evening, and to do her meditation. And I don't remember it being a fuss, but I do remember, like, oh, I'm going to go meditate now, and going into another room and hearing everyone, all the girls, whatever, we were screaming and carrying on and, partying.
Yeah.
And me sitting there quietly meditating. So it was, I guess it was a little unusual, but, it's just, that's how it was for me.
Well, destined, I guess, to be in that kind of arena. You've been teaching it for so long, and you've got your own course that you teach now. So destined, I guess, to be in this field, and that's demonstrated from being committed from that young age, I guess, Patty. And a lot of people that really end up in a certain industry and they're meant to be in it, then they are very often they're very intrigued by whatever that thing is from a young age and doing it from a young age. So I'm not surprised. It's just I find it fascinating because I don't see a lot of 13-year-olds or teenagers at all these days meditating or being committed to self-exploration in that way. So I just think that's really cool that you were doing that at that age, and even as you're sharing at the sleepover, slipping away and doing that. I think that's cool.
Yes. I guess it's just my experience. So it just, it's just how it was for me. It wasn't So it's interesting to have your reflection on that.
Yeah. Well, glad you did stick with it and learn from such a young age, because I know you've helped a lot of people with it over many, many years. And there's set us straight here, Patty, from your experience and your perception. What are how important is meditation when it comes to personal spiritual development?
Well, I feel it is important, but I also respect that there's and appreciate that there's lots of ways people can go about things. There's lots of traditions in the world and ways of being in the world that people have an ability or develop an ability to connect, to something greater, whether it's the natural environment or their own innerness or something bigger in all kinds of ways, that might be meditative or, something that's not as formal as perhaps what I've done or what a lot of things are. I think about, Native American traditions and perhaps Australian Aboriginal traditions they had a different way of, whether we call it meditating or something else. So I want to say that, but with all that, I feel like it is a really great thing. I think it's important to have that connection in whatever way someone does that,
Yeah.
In my case, it was a fairly formal technique, and I know I've kept that up and I recommend that, but I don't feel like it's absolutely exclusive,
Sure. Yeah, sure. And the word connection popped out a few times there, Patty. So is that what it is about, connecting? And if so, connecting to what? Connecting to who?
Well, I would say that it's kind of connecting to, well, what's used often in the kind of the yoga Eastern traditions, the higher self. And, that might be the soul, higher self. There's different words or expressions for some of that. It's that connection to something that's greater, bigger, more potential, more connected, bigger perspective, that kind of thing. People might frame that in different ways.
Yeah. So it's a way that people can connect and discover more of themselves or life generally.
I think it's an inner connection and it's an outer, an expanded connection at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with all the apparently enlightened Eastern gurus that I've seen in my time, meditation seems to be a huge part of their practices. And I'm wondering, I know you spoke a bit about the importance of it with personal spiritual development, but what about spiritual advancement and activations and that kind of thing? I'd like to bring that into the space because I feel like there's a lot of people out there who feel that meditation is a way to activate spiritual realities and things like that. So I'm just wondering your take on that. Is that true? Is it safe? And I guess in its purest sense, how is meditation really meant to be used, and what's it for? There's a few questions in there, Patty. Do you feel what I'm asking there?
It's a big question, actually, that one. And I have a lot of, I guess, experience and something I've considered quite a bit. I think fundamentally what we just said, or what I said about, connection, high connection, soul connection, is what it's been driving that and does still. The word you said, apparently enlightened, I think is an interesting word that you chose to use, because people, from my experience personally and from observation, people can advance in certain areas, but not be integrated or advanced or balanced, maybe, across all areas. So I feel that meditation, especially perhaps more in modern days, but it also applies perhaps to olden days and traditional ways, has been used a little bit to the exclusion of other things. And so it can have people develop a little bit in an unbalanced or unintegrated way if it's used maybe too much, or with an intention of growing one area to the exclusion of other areas. I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah.
A bit like, if you have a plant, or some plant or something, and you extract the active ingredient, and then you use the active ingredient without the holism of the whole thing. But the whole thing is important.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a bit like that. So I feel a lot in more modern times, and maybe still, meditation can be used in spiritual development groups and personal development groups and things like that. Often unknowingly. I don't think it's necessarily that people are trying to do that. I think there's a lack of education in some ways, or a lack of thoroughness, or a lack of perspective or something. And so there can be a lot of focus on a technique, not just meditation. There's other techniques too that are used like that, but meditation is, and that can create a bit of, a warpedness or something,
Yeah. What I'm hearing there is, Patty, is that although people who are meditating in a specific way might be connecting more to the spiritual realms and the higher self, as you put it, the soul, and the more eternal aspect of themselves, it might be the detriment to the more human experience. Because I have come across people that are really into meditation and can be somewhat aloof, somewhat ungrounded when it comes to the day-to-day human stuff. So there can be that imbalance there. And to build on what you've shared there, I guess in your heart, Patty, in the purest sense of meditation, what is that meant to be about, or how is it intended to be when it comes to a holistic approach, as in, the human and the spiritual reality?
Well, I think that's changed. I think that there was times, maybe not the whole time, but there's been, this focus with certain traditions and things of not really bringing the human part along so much, a bit more overriding the human experience. And I think it was just like that for a bunch of time.
Yeah.
And so we've had a bit of I feel there's been a bit of a reset with that, because it is so important to be grounded and present and integrated in life, not excluding that, not excluding the human experience. And I think that's been filtering through a lot within the communities. And I think we're still learning about how we do that. I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting because it's moving from, something that used to be, and it's not throwing the baby out the bathwater with it either, It's evolving it. It's evolving it rather than having to push things away or, swing out or something. It just needs to be it needs to be looked at a bit with fresh eyes. And so I think it's exciting, and it's kind of what I've been attempting to, I've been doing myself, grounding and being more integrated, but it's what I also like to share and teach in really as simple ways as I can,
Yeah, great you're bringing that, Patty, because I feel it's important as well. And when you're sharing that, I just feel this beautiful potential of using meditation in a way that really helps integrate the high and the low, if you want to call it that. It's because during meditation and practicing meditation, we can get in touch and connect with those higher parts and this more spiritual realms, which is just wonderful and so important to become more aware of those higher vibrational experiences and realities that we can tap into. Yet there just seems like, taught in the correct way and maybe in this new way, this exciting way, because there is an excitement about it, is that there's this beautiful potential for real integration where it's taking all of that spiritual understanding and that higher wisdom and all of those experiences that we can have through high-end meditation and connection, and really bringing that through the human experience and integrating in a very balanced way. So to have a really a loving and uplifting impact on our environment wherever we go, because there can be, I guess, this separation with it. Oh, that's the meditating, that's the spiritual, and here's the human. But it is exciting about feeling into the evolution of a real merger of it, and also where it's not just exclusive to people who are ordained and choosing to be monks or going down that route of staying in a monastery, where it could be really integrated into everyday human life.
Yeah, and I think that people learn to meditate or are interested in meditation for all kinds of reasons, and I think all of that can fit under that kind of umbrella that you kind of described there. Some people want to learn to meditate because they can't sleep very well.
Yeah.
Some people want to learn to meditate because their doctor is concerned about their high blood pressure. Some people want to learn to meditate because they're interested in spiritual development. They're being almost drawn by, their soul is drawing them forth, and they're wanting to bridge and all that. And I think there's room for all of that. You know? And in some ways it's all the same thing, but in other ways it's actually a different motivation. It's a different, and I don't think it really matters. I think it can be beneficial. And I often find teaching, because I teach really simple forms of meditation these days, and I find that new people benefit from that. And people who've been meditating a lot also benefit from it, because it brings it back to real basics, foundations of meditation. So I find that really fun, I really enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, stripping it right back to, I guess, a simple and its purest essence of what it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. It's so interesting because you mentioned a few reasons why people can meditate there. The doctor's concerned with their blood pressure. All this, there's so many reasons why people start exploring meditation, and even in the business world now, it's high-end successful business people are often utilizing meditations because it helps with focus and it helps to calm the stress and all of that sort of stuff.
Sports teams, everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It really has popped up in the sporting industry because people are using and understand the power of visualization as well. Like there's a broad spectrum of meditating and meditation techniques. In successful Olympians and high-end sports people are using it to visualize success, visualize health, and that using that component of it as well. So
Yeah.
it is spreading in the modern world, and it's changing, isn't it? I guess it's adapting and evolving, like you touched on, to suit this modern world that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that, I get, it has and will have its own involvement with that. And I think it's nice to not throw out some of the traditional values and not to get lost in some of the modern ways. I think it can inform each other.
Nice. Yeah.
I think it can each inform each other. And I think there's value in that. And then there's also the individuality with it, because everybody is different and one size doesn't fit all. And that's something I've learned a lot with teaching meditation and being exposed to working with different groups of people with different needs and needing to adapt myself better to work with their needs,
Sure. Yeah. Everybody's unique and I guess would need different techniques and ways to find that within themselves.
Everybody has a different makeup, and they have a different makeup in terms of their physical body, their emotional body, their mental body, their spiritual body. They've got a whole unique set of ingredients of how that all works and how that combines together.
Yeah. And Patty, when you were talking before about the more traditional ways of meditation and the more modern, and not getting lost in the more modern techniques, because there's such value in the ancient ways, we could say ancient ways, because it's been around forever, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Meditating.
Yeah.
Are there any specific conflicts you feel within the traditional ways and the modern ways? Do you feel like some of the modern ways, or where are they out of balance, and where do you feel they don't fit within the more traditional way?
I guess one example could be, in some of the traditional techniques or teaching or of, spiritual life, there was somewhat, you could maybe call it rigidity, the discipline perhaps, where it was almost a bit, it became, or it was a bit almost militant.
Right. Yes.
Kind of walking behind the rows of students sitting on the wooden floor and whacking them with a stick when they fell asleep, kind of thing,
Yeah.
And maybe that's a little harsh for the human experience, to have that kind of approach.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some kind of commitment and discipline and focus and commitment is a really valuable thing.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's how it's done and the motivation for it. And I guess these days it's not about beating the human into submission, like that story about when you're working with a horse, you don't break the spirit of the horse. It's not a kind, loving kind of thing to do. And I think in some of the Enlightenment traditions, there has been that real focus on, and not just in the Eastern traditions, it's been in the Western traditions as well. It got distorted somewhere. I don't know how or why that happened, but it did. And it was focused on getting away from here, was the thing. It was focused getting away from here and reaching, heaven, enlightenment, nirvana, something that was not of the human world, that was of a better or something world. And so that meant judging in order to have that kind of perspective, it meant judging what was here. And that's not integrative, and that's not being here, you know. And so things have turned now and are turning. And I think that's, well, it's just so important because we've got to be here. You know, the problems on the planet are not somewhere else, they're here. So
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were sharing briefly about that example with the horse. When you're training a horse, it's like we want to form a relationship with the horse, in a loving relationship where the horse wants to serve us and wants to, you know, take instruction from us, and very similar to the human. Instead of pushing away, because when you were sharing there, I just had this feeling of pushing away the human experience and this disconnect happening. Yet also, I love that flavor of discipline through it as well, which is important, Patty, because it's not letting the ego and the human just have its way. It's like, no, we're meditating. This is helpful and healthy and valuable. And so just finding that balance of, yeah, not being too harsh with the human at all. And I guess, yeah, treating it in such a way where the human actually wants to serve that more, the higher aspect that's coming in, really.
yeah,
And that's one of the reasons, like you've touched on, is why we're meditating, is to connect to that higher part which wants to come in, wants to bridge. And
yeah,
it's a merging. So the human needs to be on board. There needs to be discipline, but not bashing yourself up when it
yeah,
falls asleep.
yeah. And that kind of well, discipline or whatever word we want to call that, it does need to be a partnering with and a respect for, but it can also, you know, there's been a lot of traditions, or some traditions, where it is, you know, there's been a focus on, yeah, like you said, it's kind of squashing out the human rather than the human elements, that you know, learning to master those things. Because it's all very well to suppress something or repress something, or just almost ignore it, or separate it out in some way. It's all very well to do that for a period of time, and that can work for a period of time in a certain way, but there's so much energy there then that is not being dealt with in a balanced kind of way. And, you know, I'm thinking specifically here of traditions that have asked or demanded in some way that the students are celibate, say, for example.
Yeah, that's a big thing in
It's a big thing, and it's been a big traditional thing.
Yeah,
and mastering energy, or mastering one's tendencies, or, you know, the natural parts of the human and the animal part of the human and all that, is part of spiritual growth. It must be. But the approach that was taken, and there's still bits of that lingering around in various places and in the psyche of you know, the meditation kind of world, or people being exposed to meditation. You know, it's kind of going back to a previous question you had. That it's not like the motive was wrong. It was the way it was done.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And that I believe has caused a lot of imbalance. And it's good because we're learning through the whole thing. I don't think any of it's really a problem. But we can do, you know, there's always ways to do it a bit better. And and, you know, this whole idea of being able to work with it, or to refine, I was going to say tame, but it's not tame so much. It's kind of refine all these things as we grow. You know, it's a refinement process. It's a culturing process, not a, well, certainly not a judgment process. That's not going to help. or a squashing away or a denial of
Mm.
the human experience. It's it's a work
Yeah.
in progress.
Absolutely. There's no black and white with it. It really is a learning and evolving, moving thing that's changing all the time. And when you're sharing there, Patty, it's like it's not a suppression or a crushing down of the human and the human urges and the natural things that are there, which you're right, that has been a lot of the way that it has been done, and yet helpful to a certain extent. In my feeling sense, when you're sharing there, is it's more of a raising up so that all of our parts are in service of higher love, basically. And when we start exploring meditation and we're touching into the soul and those higher parts, we do become aware of a loving reality, an unconditionally loving reality, a higher vibrational reality. And so, in many ways, the meditation can help us not only get in touch with that, but then also how can we embody that more loving, unconditionally loving, higher vibrational reality that we touch into in meditation? How can we embody that as a human being? And a big part of that is just raising up. I guess you touched on the animal parts and the lower urges, not suppressing, not crushing, not beating down, but in deep acceptance and in deep, yeah, acceptance and embracing all of the human condition. And there, it's more likely, we are more likely when we do that to have more of those higher realities naturally be on board, because it's more of an open, loving, accepting experience. It's really open, which can allow some of that higher stuff to descend because it naturally wants to, and it's a process of magnetism.
Yeah.
Only a certain degree of that high vibrational energy can dock into this if it's full of fear and crap. So I love the word that you use, refinement. It feels like as we refine our character, as we refine and raise up the human being and how we express with our personality, and we become more aligned with love and upliftment and service, if you want to call that, then naturally more of that higher stuff can be present.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah.
And that's partly what um I kind of talked about a few bits back about, we can um there can be a lot of, say, someone on this, feels more awakened and wants to explore, is feel drawn, is feeling pressed to change, to say learn to meditate or something, and they can really focus a lot of energy or intention and with their practices um, on, say, meditating or techniques like that, to the exclusion of working on their psyche, say, of
Mm-hmm.
developing that at the same time. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
self-reflective kind of processes and
Mm-hmm.
clearing processes and energetic clearing processes, and really getting to meet with some of their character flaws. And and there's been a lot of work done on the what do they call it, the dark side, the what's that word that's thrown around a lot? I forget it at the moment. But working on the character flaws,
The
working
shadow
on
self.
the shadow self. Yeah, that there's been a
Yep.
lot of
Yep.
work on that, in recent years. But there can be a real tendency to try to draw out the active ingredient, like the meditation part,
Mm.
and not
Yeah.
consider the whole thing. And
Yep.
so I think that's really so important, and it's sometimes not recognized as so important. It's sometimes given lip service, and
Yep.
there is some work done on that, and there's much more. There's much more
Yep.
these days, much more.
Yep.
And I think we need to continue in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's finding that middle road, Patty, and
Yeah.
it's the emotional, mental health is just as important as the spiritual health and development. All bodies, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and so it feels like this more holistic approach, and integration pops in again. The
Yeah.
integrating the higher and the lower,
Yeah.
and finding our way with that.
And and I guess there's a mindset there too, or an attitude set of that's going to be harder work. I mean, some people
Yeah,
find
yeah.
meditation a bit difficult,
Hmm.
and that's one thing. I don't think it has to be that way, but it does take a certain dedication to sticking with it, and getting support if they need. But but the other work, the psychological work,
Mm.
is a different kind of work, and there does seem to be some. And I get it, there can be an aversion to that kind of work because it is facing up against the parts of yourself that are not enlightened. They're
They're
not,
not that.
they're
They're
not
not
that.
that.
They're not
Yeah,
that. And if there is
yeah.
any judgment about that, or, there's been traditions that haven't really acknowledged that so much, or haven't currently acknowledged that so much, I can understand why there would be that. So it's almost like a lot of it's an educational process, I feel.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why that hasn't been happening in certain traditions is because of the lack of education and the lack of understanding of the importance of the
Yeah,
integration of both sides. And I get it, Patty. It's like, why the hell would I look at this stuff? I'm this.
yeah,
There is, though, let's be honest, high end meditation. There's some feel goods in that. They talk about nirvana and bliss. We're tapping into higher vibrational energies, and it feels bloody good. When you're talking about psychological clarity and emotional health, mental health, that's the gritty stuff. That
yeah,
is the shadow work. It's like, ew, why would I want to go there when I can just escape to this? And I say escape to this because I feel that there is that tendency to escape into a different reality and and keep the human reality at arm's length. I get it. Feels good looking at our demons, our shadow self, and psychological clarity, which is basically weeding out fear-based patterning and programming in our psyche. That can feel crappy. And I've got to acknowledge that I'm not this perfect light-bodied being, and I might have some character faults and all this stuff to look at. So it's like, well, yeah, I get the aversion to it as well, especially when you've really touched into some bliss states as well. It's a bit like tiptoeing back into the human and being like, oh, still here.
or you're
And
wanting the bliss state, you're wanting to escape, you're aware of the other stuff, but you actually want to escape from that. And that's a common thing, of people wanting, they think they come to learn meditation, and then they can be a bit disappointed, that they're not getting that so much, especially if they come to me. There's a bit more. There's a bit more, but I don't want to be so grounded. And there's a very in my in my training program. The first article I have everyone read is about the happy place thing, and it's calling all that into account. It's like, what do we look at? Is this like, if you're wanting your happy place, then this is maybe,
ah,
so it's a little bit of a wake up call
so
with
you talk
that.
about the happy place being that blissful state. Are you
Yeah,
looking for that
yeah.
as a permanent state of being? And I mean that is
And it's
the
not to exclude that.
yeah. It's not to exclude either.
No, no. So we don't need to defend either, or, offend each other with either perspectives.
Yeah, yeah. It just feels like this holistic approach, landing a broader, more integrated approach, an evolution of something that was working for thousands and thousands of years and still works in so many ways, and
Exactly.
just adapting to the modern time. And acknowledging that the psychological clarity is really important, and mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health is all important to take into account. And when you were sharing there, Patty, I remember I was speaking a bit from my own experience there with the escapism, because I have had a tendency, a very addictive, all or nothing tendency that's been there for a long time. And when I first stopped drinking and had my kind of my
I
awakening.
think we have a similarity with that.
Yes, yeah, all or nothing. So finding balance. We're talking from experience here, and well, personally, what I need to work on as well is I did have that tendency to be all in and all or nothing. So when I first sort of woke up and stopped drinking, and I wasn't using external substances to alter my chemistry, because I just wanted to feel good. I felt shit. Let's be honest. I felt depressed and heavy all the time, and I didn't have the energetic tools and resources that I have now that help me clear my psyche and clear my system, and be able to live in a world that isn't all about enlightenment and enlivenment, and still maintain a level of clarity and heart connectedness. I didn't have those tools on board, yet meditation really intrigued me, and it just sucked me in and it drew me in, and I used that to escape. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the exact same addictive pattern playing out. I couldn't wait to get home so I could bliss out. I felt shit all the time, but when I got home for that half hour, an hour before my wife and daughter came home, I was out of there. I didn't know I was doing that, but it was like I was out of there. Couldn't deal with what was happening on the ground, but I could feel good. And then, Patty, it was so discombobulating for me, and it caused such conflict within me when I would come back from meditation and the family would be home and dealing with day-to-day family issues on the ground, and I couldn't hold that blissful state that I would have in meditation. And I would be like, I'm doing something wrong. I need to meditate more. I would judge myself so harshly because there was this perception that I had that I should be able to hold that state always, and it should be like that. And so as soon as I touched back in after meditation, that state was very difficult to hold when running businesses, a young daughter, marriage, all that sort of thing. It's like these grounded day-to-day things. It was quite impactful for me, and it caused me a lot of grief for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've just been on my own journey now with, I'm nowhere near obsessed, because I was obsessed with the blissing out and really quite addicted to it. That's not my experience anymore. I see the benefits and I use it in a healthy and balanced way now. It took a while, though, to come to an understanding of what was going on there and how much judgment I had, and that it was addiction playing out in a spiritual way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've had my own experience of that. And I reckon that it's part of evolving to have those challenges too, to feel those things. And I think it's also part of the solution at the same time, to have that where we're not part of the solution, but part of the way forward is, you kind of, you have an experience, maybe it's you dipping into meditation and you get a sense of, and you have an experience of something that is more refined, or, higher, brighter, clearer, whatever, your description is of that. And then you go out and you go into the world to integrate, is the idea.
Yeah. That
and
higher understanding.
You lose some of it. You have to, because you're impacted and there's shit going on and there's life happening, it's the inevitability of life happening if you're doing it on the ground. And then you meditate again, or whatever your practices are, and then you go out again. And there's a little bit of something that remains sometimes. It's like a little bit more awareness, or a little bit more being able to stay with yourself when you're feeling challenged, or there's a bit more, I don't know, whatever. It's going to be different for everyone, a bit more self-love or a bit more something, And then you go out again and it's like, you know, and
Yeah.
and you lose more again, and then you dip in again, and at some point, it's not that that's perfect, because I feel we're always growing, but at some point that, and maybe we need other tools for that. I feel we do, because things are changing and growing and evolving pretty fast. But I think that we can, at some point, that innerness, that equanimity, that unshakability, that whatever that is, can be there amidst the ups and the downs of relative human physical life, And in that sense, that's what the old traditions have kind of said, but it wasn't so grounded then. It wasn't really happening here so much. It was a bit more theoretical and a bit more up there. So it wasn't really brought all the way in here. So I think we're facing new challenges in that way. It's a new frontier. It's a new frontier being in the body and and having those higher realities all the way through. It's new.
Yeah.
Well, relatively speaking, it might have been like that, way back. I don't know, well, I do kind of know, but it was like that way back. But we've had a whole period where it hasn't been. It's been split.
Yeah, split. That's the perfect word for it. It feels like there's been a split with it. And that's why the meditation practices can help us, because it just starts to trickle in.
Yeah.
Because we're getting better at focusing and connecting during our practices, and then it starts to trickle in during our day-to-day living. Great to have this information out there, Patty, because I feel that a lot of people have that experience of using it to escape and not understanding it, and that there is this more integrated way we can go about it. So brilliant. And in your experience teaching, and I get in your own experience as well, what do you feel are the main challenges that people come up against with the techniques?
Well, it's a spin-off. It's a spin-off of that discussion we just had, I think, because people will say, "Oh, I can't meditate. I have so many thoughts, and my mind's so busy. And so they don't continue sometimes. Or they just think it's too hard, or I can't do it. I can't meditate." And not everyone has to meditate or needs to meditate, but if there was some inclination towards it and then giving up, I feel that that's a shame, because it's partly they've got expectations about how they think it should be, or that it shouldn't be a challenge, or they shouldn't feel what you and I have just described, of that this is hard. I feel that, and then I do have to, that's part of it, So I feel that people can give up on themselves a bit fast because there's been this almost like a myth, or a agreed upon myth, that it is the happy place. But my experience is not the happy place. And we tend to then make that personal and say there's something wrong with me. So I would say that's one of the main things. And then, and that involves some discipline and staying with itness. But there's education that goes with that. I think there's also a valuing it that sometimes is missing, because so much success and esteem that gets tied, self-esteem that gets tied into it all. Particularly in the Western world, but it's pretty common these days, is so much built around, and we evaluate ourselves based on success in a fairly materialistic way, and it's not that that's not valid and important, but to the exclusion of doing nothing or being is not valuable. You know,
Mm.
I'm not
Mm.
accomplishing something, I'm not doing something. And I think
Yeah.
there's a bit of that
Yep.
that also can discourage people, or they just they don't stick with it enough. They don't really value that innerness,
Mm.
that, and it's a
Yeah.
it's relationship with self.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of our most important relationships, is the relationship we have with ourselves. So I I reckon that, and I have this discussion quite often. People might come to a meditation, or when I'm working with facilitators, and people might say after a meditation, oh, I was just so aware of how much my, how agitated I felt, or how much my mind was going off. And I'm like, that's a win. That's more awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, how
Yeah.
do we work with that? But then within that,
Yeah.
people have we have to respect people's window of tolerance, that's talked about a lot these days, this window of tolerance idea. And it can take time for people to be able to be with themselves or sit with themselves when there has been, or there is, a bunch of stuff. I always say it's kind of like, when we can sit to meditate, it can be that we're catching up with ourselves.
Oh,
And there's
yeah. I love
sometimes a
that.
lot to
Yeah.
catch up with, you know.
Yeah. Nice.
There's
Yeah.
been all these impacts, there's been all this emotional
Yeah.
turmoil, there's been mental confusion, and there's been the other
Yeah.
stuff too, but there can be that. I remember one person came to one of my students was doing a prac meditation session, and this one person came to this session. They hadn't done any kind of meditation before, and um, they sat to meditate, and then within just a few moments, there was tears,
Mm.
and that's not an unusual experience. But we need to be comfortable with emotions,
Mm.
and it wasn't to the point where they needed some additional support. It was just they were
Mm-hmm.
feeling, because there is, we need to be a trauma aware and all that as well. And we just normalized it, and the session continued and all that. It was some months later, that same person, who actually had a business not far from my studio, walked in one day, just walked in, and said to me, I felt like I needed to come here, and can I just go into the room and I just need to lay down. I just need to be.
Whoa.
And I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, that's so cool. That is so
Yeah.
cool that person felt like, because
Mm.
it was designated as a yoga and meditation place, and that was a bit
Yeah.
quiet, and it had a quieter vibe about it, right? She felt she could be safe, and she could come and she could be with herself
Wow. Mm.
when things were a bit rough.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, in my business sense, I wasn't making any money out of this, but I was just so delighted that
Yeah.
that would be a little bit of a sanctuary for her to be with herself.
That's beautiful, Patty. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you're bringing that, because in such a fast-paced world these days, we can just become so disconnected with ourselves, and everything's so busy, and now, and this, and we can get lost. And yeah, meditation is a way where we are catching up with ourselves in so many ways. And it feels important to share here. From my perspective, it's such a wonderful technique and activity to cultivate self-awareness of who I actually am. So if you're someone out there wondering who the hell you are and what's actually going on for me, no better way really than to meditate, because that is you starting to explore who you actually are beyond the surface, starting to explore and become aware of your inner world and the inner dynamics. And it's through that focus and through that cultivating of self-awareness that we do start to understand why we are the way we are. We start to become aware of the busy mind and perhaps unhealthy patterns and programs. It's just such a beautiful way to take stock on what's actually going on for us, and actually who we are beyond the surface, and start exploring and connecting with that. It's very much a journey of self-discovery, and I feel near on impossible to undergo any deep and everlasting self-discovery without some component of meditating, however that looks like for you. And that beautiful, you said, relationship with self as well there, Patty, and that's just so critical in such a busy world, and this is just such a beautiful way to connect with self.
I agree.
Yeah, lovely story with your student coming in like that, and that's really beautiful that she
Well, it
felt
wasn't even
safe.
my student, but it was just, but yes, it was.
Yeah, nice one. So let's just talk. We're getting towards the end, but I'm interested to know some of the benefits you spoke of early on about blood pressure, and we've touched on a lot of the benefits of meditation. Yet, in a grounded sense, what are some of the benefits of regular meditation for the human and for
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of research done on meditation and mindfulness meditation, and it slows the system down. And if we are moving in a fast-paced world, or we're creating that fast-pacedness within us and causing stress, it's not the stress is the problem, it's the continual stress that's the problem, that puts pressure on the various glands and organs and all that. So I just see it as quite simple, really. It just starts to slow things down, probably back to more of a normal state, where there's just more equilibrium and more homeostasis kind of within the system, because most people are revving fast. I think just living in the world, it's revving fast because we just have so much input all the time. Technology and, the whole thing, and just life. There's I think there's tremendous amount of benefit for that in just calming down and slowing down at times. And it doesn't mean that we have to always be like that. But it helps to reset and rebalance and calibrate things. I think it doesn't mean that, a meditation period needs to be a long period of time. I think, shorter periods of time, or even brief, pauses, can, depending on the person's temperament and all that, can be really valuable. I'll tell another little story. I had some clients that I was working with for a longer period of time. Actually, they had me come in every week to their company, and in Perth it was, and kind of blue collar workers, steel cap boots and all that. And we would meet around the table each week and practice, meditation techniques, a little bit of yoga and stuff. One day I took in, my students have heard me tell this story. I took in a little affirmation-y thing. It just said, just breathe, take 3. And it was a little colouring in thing. And I thought, let's do this today, So I put this little piece of paper and colouring in stuff on the table, and everyone arrived and they started colouring it in. And it was girls and guys there, mostly guys in that group. And I hadn't tried this before. It's quite different to kind of my traditional kind of meditation stuff, right? But I thought, So it was when the mindfulness colouring in was a big craze, I think. And so they sat down and they just started to colour, and the room just goes, because everyone's focused, and they've left all their other stuff behind. It's a meditative experience in and of itself, right?
Yep.
And so they did that for a while, and I thought, I'll do it for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to something else. after about 10 minutes, everyone's still colouring, and, I could see some of the guys are like doing little borders, and, someone had and all that, and they were really getting into it. And then at some point I said, okay, I'll laminate them later and all that, and I'll give them to you before, at the end, I'll leave them out here and you can take them at the end of the day. I didn't want to take them away from their work, right? And at the end of the session, they all stood around and they're like, we're not leaving till we get them. We're not going back to work. So then as a team, we they ran off and they got scissors and we cut them up and we laminated and then they took them. But we practiced, let's just stop and breathe, take 3 breaths. Just that, right? It makes a difference, right? So a year later, that after, I don't know, however many months it was, that program ended. And then a year later, they invited me back to do another thing. And I went in and I was sitting in the controller's office and I was waiting. He was on the phone on conversation. He was sitting at his desk facing his screen. And then when he was finished, he swung around and he's in his chair and he looked at me and he said, hello, and all that. And on the corner of his screen was his little just breathe, take 3.
Whoa.
And I'm like, hey, look. And he said, I use it. He was one that was a little skeptical to start with. And he was like, I use it all the time. I said, really? He said, yep. He said, I'll get an email, a fairly big position in the company. He said, I get an email. He said, I'm really pissed off, and I'm just, and he said, I stop. I take 3 and then I respond to the email.
Wow. Nice, Patty.
So it's these little moments as well as the big moments, I think, it's just little meditations, like you say, to have more awareness. So we're not reacting so much. So in terms of benefits, that can be a big benefit because when we, as we all know, when we react from something within us that's hectic, that's stressful, that's whatever it is, defensive or whatever, it can unroll a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
And if we can just take a moment, and we can't always take a moment, but if we can take a moment or 2 or 3, that can have a big impact. And then there's not going to be so much rolling on and then other stress that gets created.
Yeah. Yeah, it's helping us with the ability to consciously respond to what's happening rather than just reacting.
Yeah. And then that continues refining because what we perceive within us that needs refining continues to need refining, so it becomes more subtle. It becomes more subtle. But I think those really on the surface kind of stuff are big wins.
Yeah.
They're big
absolutely.
Wins.
Yeah.
But, the benefits go through all areas, and it's been documented now in terms of, changing DNA and telomeres, not disappearing so fast, and that affects the aging process. And, there's research done on neurotransmitters and stress hormones and, all that's been fairly documented these days. But everyone experiences it differently. And I think there's heaps of evidence of the value of it.
Yeah.
It's self-evident, really, these days.
I feel like the reducing of stress is such a big part of it, the reduction of stress.
When I started meditating, because that was kind of why my mum started meditating, right, was, the stress of going through that period of her life. And when I first became a teacher, we used to talk a lot about stress. I'd give talks about learning to meditate and introductory talks and all that, and talked about stress and the effects of stress and, blah, blah. And then after some years of that, I was like, people don't want to hear about, I had this thing within me. People don't really want to hear about that. We're done with stress. But it's become so much more obvious to me that we are nowhere near done with stress. Yeah. And it is still relevant, and I can still talk about it and not feel like I'm, hacking on something that's a done deal, because I felt like that. So I'm still in the business of stress reduction.
It's stressful, Patty, being here. There's just so much stimulation constantly. Like it's just stimulation mode in the world. And unless we're really consciously taking the time to connect with ourselves and do something different, then we can just get caught up in that stress and stimulation. That's just go, go, go all the time. The world is like buzzing. And so, absolutely. So many benefits with meditation, and the stress reduction is a big one, I feel. Yeah. Thank you, Patty. I want to touch on, just quickly, because there's a question I didn't ask in amongst all of that. And I was like, do I ask that? Do I let it go? I feel to ask it because I'd like to know your perspective on it. And I'm sure other people will as well. There's been a bit of talk of late about how meditation can have adverse effects on our health as well. Specifically tumours and cancers, brain tumours, in fact, that's come to the fore a little bit. Just wondering your experience and your outlook on that.
Well, I think there can be adverse effects. I wouldn't say it's meditation that causes the adverse effects. I would say it's our approach to it. And the appropriateness of meditation, and maybe extended meditation or long meditation over a period of time, the effect of that if there's not holistic growth happening. So I don't think it's meditation, but I haven't seen any research done on cancer or anything being caused by these things. Anecdotally, from my own experience, I would say I have seen people who have devoted a lot of their life to meditation or similar kind of spiritual practices or other spiritual practices. There does seem to me that there has been a disproportionate amount of health problems that I wouldn't expect or would be keen to see in people who have spent so much time on that, which makes me feel, and is certainly something that I've considered quite a bit, although I feel people are quite reluctant or defensive to look at this in my own experience, and I understand why they would be. Because they feel the benefit as well. So it's one of those, it's a bit discombobulating to consider it, but I do think it is a thing, and I believe it's from often what's not being included rather than what is being included, in terms of what we mentioned before, energetic clearing techniques. When people are spending more time or a lot of time on these kind of practices, and they're not keeping up, say, with the same level of work or the same level of clearing or refining physically, emotionally, mentally, there's going to be some imbalance. And how that imbalance could play out, and perhaps has played out, is because the physical body, say the actual physical body, is the densest body. If we're looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual body, it's the densest body. It changes the slowest. And if we're bringing in and experiencing, connecting with, bridging in with higher frequency energy, and changing, in those dimensions more, the other bodies need to keep up. And if they're not, then it can cause imbalance and more in the densest body. And that's the way I've learned and been educated and perceive that now. And I believe it's correct. I've just seen enough evidence in my own life. But the way that's going to play out, there's probably a myriad of ways. It puts quite a bit of stress on the densest part of our body to have so much spiritual currents, and I don't think that's acknowledged really or educated about. It's more of an education thing again. And it's not across the board, but it is prevalent, I would say. And I've seen quite a bit of it in the yoga and meditation community, although nobody I've heard is addressing that really. It's something I've been keen to address, or to at least start a conversation about. But I do find if I ever broach it, I do get kickback for it. Which is a shame, because why would we not want to improve things?
And explore. But
I don't think people need to be fearful about meditation. So I'm not saying that. I think meditation is really valuable. And if we keep it grounded and we keep working on ourselves and including, clearing techniques and other things, it can be, it'll make it better. And I think it's that kind of problem or that kind of phenomena can happen more in a long-term kind of situation where people have been practicing and almost intensely practicing and have brought in a lot or developed or created a lot more of that higher development and that higher spiritual currents, and it's not able to be integrated properly.
Anything in it, any activity or behavior in its extremes, when done out of balance and not in a holistic approach, can cause problems.
Holistic approach, So I think it is. It needs to be in the longer term view in spiritual schools, at teachings and stuff like that. I think it definitely needs to be a factor that's taken into account. Otherwise, they'll be defeating the purpose of what they're doing.
Thanks, Patty. It's a touchy subject. That part is a little bit touchy, but I think it is important to have an open conversation about it. And it comes back to what we've spoke about a lot today, which is just that holistic approach, and all bodies are important. And physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health are all important. So thanks for touching on that. Do you feel like this meditation is a life skill that we could teach in schools from a very young age?
Oh, absolutely.
Or do we let
no, I think it's really important, and I've taught in schools for a long time. It just needs to be adapted to a way that makes it accessible and accessible for kids or teens or teenagers or whatever, But they tend to love it. I find they love it, and they love because they're stressed too.
Yes.
School and learning and being with their friends, or they're not friends, the whole dynamics that go on as they're going through their own maturing process, that's a stressful experience, and exams and tests and however their school works, all that. So I find that they benefit from stress management reduction techniques as much as anybody does, and they respond to it, Their nervous systems are more sensitive too at those ages, so they benefit from it more even.
Yeah. Puberty. They're going through a lot, going through puberty.
Oh, yeah, there's so
There's a
much going
lot.
on, you know. So yeah, I
Mm.
think it's a great idea, and it's also something they can do with their friends or their classmates and stuff. That is kind of an equalizer, you know. If there's this group
Yeah.
and this clique and that, you know, whatever, because
Yeah.
everyone's got their
Huh.
own interests, and you know, then everyone just sits and meditates together.
Huh. Yeah.
It's an equal. I used to find that when I used to do big group meditations, you know, years ago, I found that, you know, people walk in and there'd be, you know, in the community where I lived, there was people that were very wealthy, and then there was people that really weren't very wealthy. And, um, you know, you leave your car keys out in your locker and, you know, you walk in and you're a human, you know.
Yes.
And that was
Yeah.
a really, and everyone appreciated that.
Yeah. I love that, Fatty. It's like status doesn't matter, roles don't matter when you're just sitting down to meditate. And ultimately, we're all the same on the inside. And it's a journey of discovering that for yourself. Yeah, lovely. And I see how that could be uh, helpful with kids as well. Just that
Yeah. I used to
equalizing.
have the kids facilitate meditate. I'd have them facilitate, you know. I would have kids teach kids meditation, and I'd give them scripts, or they could make up stuff sometimes. And it was so good for their self-esteem as well, you know.
Mm,
Some of them felt challenged by it, and others always wanted to do it, and they all had a go. And yeah, it was lovely to watch them. And then I'd give them bit, you know, like, and maybe just slow down a little bit more next time. You know, it was fun. It was
that
fun.
sounds fun.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
fun.
nice, Patty. So we're wrapping up shortly, and a couple of favorite questions that I like to finish with. What's your personal favorite thing about meditating itself?
Um, I would say these days it's really about being there for myself.
Mm, nice one. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I can
lovely.
still have all the expanded stuff, and I do, but and I enjoy that. I love that. But it's just being with me. And sometimes the me is a bigger me, but you know, just me.
Nice one. Thanks, Patty. And what about teaching? What's your favorite part of sharing all this knowledge that you've accumulated over many, many years? What's your favorite part of teaching it?
It's pretty simple. I really enjoy seeing people just, you know,
Mm.
just calm down a little, just get a bigger perspective. Because oftentimes when people come in, there's, you know, there's all that, there's a lot of activity, you know, and there's a lot of things that have been happening and happening in their life and been happening for years. And then they can sit, and it's almost like the perspective changes. It just is a slightly different world. And, you know, it's like when you have a painting, and if you're up really close to the painting, you know, you're seeing these little strokes of color. There's not much there, but when you step back, and just it's just that
Mm.
perspective, you know, it's not quite so caught up, not quite so identified with all the drama, you know, and a little bit more like, oh, you know, it's a bit more, it's okay. That I love.
Nice one. I love that description of the painting and then the broader perspective when you step back. Awesome, Patty. Well, thanks for all your work that you have done, and that you are continuing to do, because I know you're still very active in that scene. So that's wonderful. And did you have an intake coming up? Did you have Would you like to share a bit about your course, when that's happening and what that's about?
Sure, sure. And there's lots of people teaching, meditations, lots of people teach it in different ways and run courses and all that. My course is probably a little different in that it does focus on a lot of these things that we've talked about, shakes up. I challenge people's beliefs and myths about meditating and all that. And bring in trauma-informed practices. And yeah, I do. I have an intake at the moment, and people are just doing their pracs. They're just facilitating for others, which is always a fun and a little bit nervous kind of experience for them and for me, actually. Well, it's a certain responsibility.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So I don't take that lightly. And yeah, I do. I have another intake in about another month or so. Yeah.
Great. Is there an email or something that you could give, or a website? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, my website, pattymcbain.com.au, has all the
Great.
details. Yeah, it's registered. It's a course that's registered with IICT and Meditation Australia.
Wonderful. I'll put the details in the description. So if anyone is interested, and I mean, there'll be people that will be drawn to this way and your way and the way that you're doing it. So that's great. Thanks so much, Patty. Is there anything you want to share just to wrap up about anything to do with meditation, just to wrap up the whole conversation?
Not really. I think, we've talked a lot about it. It's really the experience that's the thing. If there was to do anything, it would be let's meditate, but we don't need to do that now. But, take 3 breaths.
Such good advice in such a busy world, and there is just so much benefit to meditating, I feel, and lovely to have a chat to you and find out a bit more about what makes you tick, Miss Patty, and what you're doing and what you've done. So thank you very much. As I said just before, I'll put Patty's details in the description below. I know a lot of people that have done her course and speak very highly of her and the material and the course. So highly recommended if you would like to experience a grounded and holistic, integrated way of meditating. Lots of love, people. Stay bright. Remember, never ever give up, and let's change this planet.